Hi, I'm David Petersen, the creator of MouseGuard, and this is Creator Commentary for the extras in the MouseGuard Winter hardcover. Please feel free to follow along in your copy of the hardcover as I talk about the behind-the-scenes details, art notes, and my headspace as I go through the extras created to collect issues 1 through 6 into this edition. Archaea founder Mark Smiley had helped me with the book design for the fall hardcover, and he was there for the winter book as well, even though Archaea was under new ownership at the time, and Mark had taken a step back from management. This time, however, it was much easier to work on the book design, as we had a template to follow from the first hardcover. Jacket cover. I remember facing a minor dilemma over what characters should be on the hardcover jacket. I realized that the full 5-mouse patrol of Kenzie, Saxon, Sadie, Liam, and Kellanaw would be too crowded, and since I felt the mentor-mentee relationship of Kellanaw and Liam were at the heart of this volume, I featured them on the front cover. The back of the jacket is almost entirely taken up with the one-eyed owl. I had this visual of the profile of the owl on the cover of Winter from the start of issue 1. Though in its earliest mental picture, it was a hawk, until Mark Smiley and my wife Julia talked me into an owl instead. The branches are all a color hold, painted in a very dark purple. And like the rest of Winter, the ground snow stippling gets held as well, while the falling snow was all done on an overlay sheet by dotting the paper with a cotton swab dipped in ink. The scan of the overlay is then inverted so that the snow is white. End papers. I discussed what end papers are in the fall hardcover extras video, but for those of you who may not have seen it, end papers are the paper that glue to the inside face of the cover, and then continue to the right, or left if it's the back cover, as the very first page you see with the cover opened. Using the fall book as a template, I just adjusted the color of the map we used for that volume to a more seasonably appropriate tint. Title page. The fall volume's book design established this 2-page title page and dedication spread with a spot illustration on the left page, with some element carrying over through the spine and onto the right page. For the winter volume, I gave the space to Kenzie, Saxon having it in fall. He's patrolling in the snow with his lantern. The falling snow is then the visual that cascades into the other side of the spine. The dedication, like almost all the MouseGuard books, is to my wife Julia. This entire volume was created after I'd quit my day job, which made sense after the fall hardcover sales numbers came in, but it still felt a little reckless at the time. Julia continued to work a day job, and I was always grateful for her support, understanding, and belief in me and my books to make this work. The other thanks go out to my parents, the friends of mine who inspired Kenzie, Liam, and Kellanaw, my weekly art group, the pinup contributors, the publishing staff, and James Gurney, which brings us to forward. The fall hardcover had a preface I wrote to sort of explain where MouseGuard had come from and what it meant to me. But I wasn't feeling like I should write another block of text like that for this volume. So I reached out to illustrator and modern Renaissance genius James Gurney. James is the creator of the Dinotopia series of books and is a wonderful teacher, painter, writer, researcher, and maker. I'm very grateful he said yes and agreed to write this lovely piece to open up the winter book. I dressed out the bottom of the page a bit with a simple snowy landscape. Spot illustrations. To separate the various sections of the book, I drew 3 tall panels of nature scenes. Since I did so many of these for the inside front covers of the issues, I tried to just keep up the simple snow-covered nature imagery, but I did worry I was just repeating myself. The first one is found opposite the contents page of a flowering weed that I'm tempted to say was drawn from reference of a plant growing in my neighbor's yard, but I can't find any evidence of the photo in my archives, so I also may have just found something in an online image search. The setting sun casting long shadows on the snow illustration appears opposite the page announcing the epilogue. This is one I know I looked at photo reference for. Having more space, I felt that I could play with some lighting and time of day effects that I felt too constrained by the inside front cover pieces to try back then. I also like that while the sun is setting, suggesting an ending, the glow also offers an optimism that the epilogue hints at. Lastly, the crotch of a snowy tree illustration before the other extras. Of the three illustrations, this is the one I'm the least happy with. It's a bit too plain and boring, and I wish I'd done something to make it visually a little less static. Epilogue. Unlike fall that ended a bit abruptly, winter ended in a way I was much happier with, so I didn't need the epilogue to do as much work as in the previous volume, but I still wanted to take up the space to wrap up some story threads and character moments. Page 1. The first panel opens with Gwendolyn writing in her journal of the events after Kalanaugh's funeral. I like doing these panels to break up the visuals so there aren't mice in every moment, though just seeing her penmanship I think also suggests a way of mouse life. The summit I mentioned in the issues is now in full swing, and I had fun designing all the representatives from those places. More on most of them later when I cover the other extras in the book, but I would like to talk about Firth in panel 2. Copperwood was a city I had ideas about as being the largest city in the territories. So big, it's too hard to govern without the leadership having some level of corruption. I pictured the place to be a bit like a Dickensian town, with smoky chimneys, dwellings overgrown and stacked on top of themselves, with every economic class of mouse inhabiting the strata of buildings, all inside an enormous oak tree. Below in the root system are mines, where the mice have found copper ore, which has led to the city's wealth and opportunity for corruption. To give Firth some of that backstory in his visuals, I gave him a huge ostentatious peacock feather as part of his garment, as well as a copper collar and his city's flag as a front drape. All of this should help the reader understand why Gwendolyn thought Firth's point was self-serving. In panel 3, I show the library window again, based on Jane Irwin's pinup from issue 6. Most of the narration on this page was about me trying to make it clear how Lockhaven and the Guard work in mouse society, because I was still hearing fans and podcasters and reviewers getting it wrong, thinking that Lockhaven was somehow a capital city, and that from there Gwendolyn ruled the mouse territories. Page 2. Panel 1 is almost the same as the last panel of the previous page, but from a slightly different angle, so I could continue the narration as the final details to the summit agreement are reached. It also gave me a chance to show a slightly better view of the representatives. And the page ends with Gwendolyn leaving the table and leaving the library in the last panel, since the narration will move on from the summit on the next page. The narration here, though, deals with tying up loose ends, of how the mice will try to prevent what happened with a food shortage and agree that the hares should be repaid in grain for their help first. It's always been important to me that in Mouseguard, the mice are not naturally friends with the other grain eaters, that those other animals are only occasional allies. In my notes for the epilogue, it looks like part of the focus for improving mouse life I was planning to deal with, and obviously abandoned, was communication methods, including lantern signaling, flag semaphore, and, quote, perhaps the training of birds for mounted lookouts. All ideas that I think are too big for this scene, but cool things to think about exploring in future Mouseguard stories. This was the last page I needed to finish for the entire hardcover for some reason. I was coloring and lettering things out of order. On a tight deadline with the book due, I was pulling an all-nighter to get the files uploaded to Archaea before start of business. And when I was almost entirely done with the coloring on this page, Photoshop crashed. I hadn't saved anything, not even the color flats. I had to go all the way back to the inks. I'd lost work before from not saving, but never anything that drastic. And I cried. I had a good sob. And then I emailed Archaea explaining the situation, that I'd uploaded everything else to them, and that I needed to sleep, and that when I woke up, I'd color this page and get it to them as soon as possible. Thankfully, everyone at Archaea understood. Page 3. Sadie and Kenzie oversee the repair of the cistern. The narration here is pretty straightforward, just Gwendolyn putting a bit of poetic spin on what we already knew happened regarding the poison and the fresh water. One of the Mason mice in panel 2 is a cameo of the Mason from the Mouse trade spread in the fall hardcover. The dialogue in the last panel was meant to cement the idea to the reader of Kenzie and Sadie's relationship. But then the narration trails off, and I found handwritten on my script for the issue an idea that comes after that the two would make an expedition to recover Conrad's body. Something I thought Sadie would feel strongly about doing after seeing Kellenaw's proper hero funeral. I opted not to explore that thread, though, partly for space, but also because I'd just spent an entire volume explaining that mice don't and shouldn't do much patrolling in the winter unless it's vital. And the Conrad corpse collection didn't seem like the right occasion to throw them back out into the snow. Page 4. The narration here is talking about threats from within, with Abigail's plot to starve the mice as the focus. With the visuals are a pullback of the cistern cavern showing the mice being watched by a weasel with a candle on its crown, holding a bat from its arm. I know I was building up to something here, but for the life of me, I haven't been able to remember where I was going with this in years and years. I don't currently have any plot or story thread in mind for this Watcher weasel. But I think its simple presence does enough to explain why parts of Dark Heather still had vagrant-like signs of life. Looking at my original notes, I'd thought about using this page for Kenzie and Sadie to oversee a filling in and caving in of Dark Heather tunnels leading to the cistern. But I went with this instead. I kind of think it's because I figured this would be more enjoyable to draw and the other would be too difficult. Page 5. Liam is taking the exact steps in panels 1 and 2 that Midnight took in fall when he discovered proof of the legend of the Black Axe to be true. For the last panel of the page, I put Liam in Kellenaw's footprints, right where Kellenaw stood in the fall epilogue, holding what ends up to be M's book from the third Mouseguard volume, The Black Axe. Liam, arm in a sling, is now able to read all the illuminated pages about the mythic hero that his mentor was. On the shelves are all kinds of Easter eggs. A piece of Dark Heather tile, a map case meant to look like the one from Pan's Labyrinth, a bronze mouse I made in college, the hammer of Farer who forged the Black Axe, R2-D2, because I was still trying to hide Star Wars references. In fact, in the panel above on the bookshelves is an AT-AT. But back down in panel 3 are books with the initials JAB for Jeremy Bastian, K-T for Katie Cook, NVIII for Nate Pride, and a book with a Burning Wheel logo, the system Luke Crane adapted for the Mouseguard RPG. In the trunk is Kellenaw's old cloak and helmet, or the helmet of a past Black Axe, and on the floor is the sword fragment Kellenaw used at the end of fall. Page 6. As Liam explores these forgotten and hidden passageways, he comes to a circular stairwell, which leads to the portrait door that Kellenaw knows of in fall. And when Liam gets to the top, he finds where Saxon stashed the Black Axe when it arrived at Lockhaven. The narration about Gwendolyn planning to promote Liam and give him a tender paw was something to get the reader excited for a vision of Liam's future, right before I push him on a totally different path. For the architecture on the first 2 panels of this page and the second panel of the previous page, I did use a lot of photo reference. Page 7. Saxon's page. In my first notes, I was going to have him raising Rand's spirits, but when it came time to do the epilogue pages, I wanted to go further with his love for Gwendolyn and show something about that. It was very handy to have the architectural model of this room on hand to help me pace and frame the panels for this page, and part of the next one too. In the Mouseguard role-playing game, we spell out that a mouse coming to Lockhaven to become a guard must take on some job of service to the guard, and that it usually reflects something that one of their parents did. I have a story in mind for Saxon and Kenzie's arrival at Lockhaven in regard to this, but without spoiling it entirely, I can share that Saxon's time at Lockhaven in service was in textiles. So while it's not implied in these pages, I've always felt that Saxon either made this dress or helped in its construction or the dyeing of its fabric. In the last panel, Gwendolyn notes having to choose a successor for an eventuality that she would want to step down as matriarch. The way a new matriarch is chosen is by written decree of the previous matriarch's choosing. But because there is always a risk of a matriarch dying, she should at all times have a sealed envelope with a successor chosen. It can be changed and updated as she chooses during her life, much like a will. But that way, in the event of an untimely death, a new matriarch is ready. I guess Gwendolyn wasn't following the protocol if she's only just now starting to think about this. Or perhaps it's just time to update the name. Page 8. In the final page of the epilogue, Saxon notices that the portrait door is ajar, and his eyes become pinprick dots when he notices the axe is missing. And in the last panel, we see Liam, geared up and leaving Lockhaven for his truest calling, to be the Black Axe. In the window, you can just see Saxon's silhouette. Saxon is watching the Tenderpaw he and Kenzie trained, walking off to become his own mouse. A mouse of myth and legend. Map. For the winter map, I just tinted the fall map to be a bit more on theme for winter. Then I added a new legend and new paths for the routes each patrol took. I was doing this after I'd finished the series, so the patrols and the cities they had visited were locked in with the dialogue. But that made our main cast's path difficult to track and make logical sense of, since we know they visited Spruce Tuck last before heading back to Lockhaven. To factor that in, it meant that I couldn't make the route nice and circular and efficient. And I figured that in story terms, we can chalk it up to perhaps having to reroute due to weather at some point before issue 1 starts. All of the new map legend and footprint art was drawn separately on a new sheet of Bristol, with the original map underneath visible on a light box. Spruce Tuck. As I mentioned in the winter issue 1 commentary, Spruce Tuck was the merging of the aesthetics of what if Brian Froud had designed the Ewok village. For the 2-page spread, I photographed my model of the location, which turned out to be the last time before it fell apart due to poor construction, and then did a new pencil drawing over the top of the photo to use as a starting point to ink from. With Spruce Tuck being so tall and vertical, making the image spread over 2 pages meant I had to show the cutaway of the tree edge all the way out to the snowy landscape outside, which is only visible through the infographic boxes. The hot stones were something I came up with when wondering how to heat such an oddly shaped mouse city, with no exposed chimneys in the issue 1 illustrations, and also inside a flammable tree. I gave them one central fire, where they'd heat rocks, to place in their apartments, almost like an old-fashioned bed warmer. I'm still not quite sure how all the lifts work, especially since they tend to be a fair distance from any floor's balcony. Perhaps the operator has a hook to latch on to the woodwork and pull the carriage over safely by the planking? I don't know. The science infographic mostly shores up what I had already explained about Spruce Tuck in issue 1. And the Glazier's info was a way of both explaining all the elaborate glass in Spruce Tuck, but also to do some fun world building about their formulation and design sense. Dark Heather. I cut up the Dark Heather spread a little differently than the past guide cutaways. I wanted to show that bone room, and I didn't have an extra page to play with in the book design, so it all had to go here. I don't like how thin the floors are in this cutaway. While I didn't make this out of foam core, it kind of looks like I did. Instead, I looked at the one archway model piece I made, and then tried to include almost every hallway and chamber Saxon, Kenzie, and Sadie explored, though I couldn't get the dining hall in and still make this look like a maze of tunnels. You can follow their route from the gates, through the hallways, and their specific archway and tile patterns up to where the 3 mice met the bats on the top level. The tile fragment was a thing I wanted to explore because I'd already thought about the design work, but it also helped me fill a space that would have otherwise just been stippled dirt. I used the bone chamber room model for reference again for the illustration on the right page. I talked about that model in the commentary for Winter issue 4. And when I recorded issue 4's commentary, I had forgotten that I had included the description here in the text about the circle opening, rise to thy stars above, with the weasel's reason for leaving an open-air escape for their victims. Trades. Like the fall books trades, many of these were inspired by my childhood visits to working historic towns like Greenfield Village in Dearborn, Michigan, Crossroads Village in Flint, Michigan, Fort Mackinac, Colonial Williamsburg, White Pine Village outside of Ludington, Michigan, and a few others. For the blacksmith, I tried to imagine how a lone mouse would be able to work their bellows to stoke the fire, as well as work the metal in the heat and on the anvil without having to move all over the shop. The wrapped armband has somehow become a visual cue of mine for a blacksmith, something to wipe sweat away from their face, easily on hand. The boat builder I included because I had implied Sadie's boat work in fall and again here in winter, but I wanted to show a proper boat under construction rather than a leaf or a bucket. The black stuff in the pail of this illustration is meant to be pitch, something to seal the joints and peg holes as the boat is constructed for waterproofing. The Weather Watcher was a trade I'd thought about including in the fall book, since there are numerous mentions of mouse weather watchers. I'd looked up as many natural cues to weather prediction changes as I could find, from insect behavior to leaf positions and curls and pine cone tightness. Because I think that this trade has to also have some interpretation and could easily feel a little like witchcraft or magic, I gave the mouse a bone decoration to make it feel a little more mystical as a craft. For the healer, I mostly just recreated a better spot illustration version of what we saw in the Lock Haven Apothecary. At the bottom of the spread is mouse pageantry and attire. I thoroughly stole this idea from James Gurney's Dinotopia book, where he did a lineup like this with representatives from each region displaying their clothes, colors, and banners. In my version, each mouse got a prop instead of a dinosaur. To help with the epilogue pages I talked about earlier, I drew these designs long before I started to work on that portion of the book, so I knew what each mouse of the summit should look like. Blackrock. My idea for Blackrock is that it holds precious paper archives. I was inspired by the unfinished Hall of Records planned by Gutzon Borglum behind Mount Rushmore that was to hold the Constitution, Bill of Rights, etc. So this mouse has glasses to read well with, and his prop is a portfolio case, presumably filled with important papers, and on the outside of the portfolio, the Blackrock emblem, which I can't completely make out what it's supposed to be anymore. Shaleborough. I figured this is a cavernous town that is always cellar cold, hence our mouse from there has a fur coat, hat, and slippers, as well as a lit pipe, and a firefly companion to light his way. Ivydale. This one is a little on the nose with the stylized ivy leaf as clothing. I'm not sure what inspired the Dreamcatcher, other than making something look interesting that invited the reader to perceive more there than what I had actually put on the page. Though I do wonder now if I was planning those beads to be some form of star map. I'll skip Copperwood since I talked about that garment in the epilogue section of the commentary. Elmwood. For Elmwood, I wanted something a little prettier and more elegant to contrast the rougher looks of some of the other mice here. The netted tassels are something I've repeated here and there in mouse designs, most notably on Landra, the mouse in winter who is based on my sister-in-law, Kim. The two flag banners here are depicting the buds of an elm tree, and the dragonfly, I think, was inspired right off of one of the flags in that Dinotopia spread. Sand Mason. For this town, I pictured somewhere like Sleeping Bear sand dunes in Michigan, so the mouse has protective clothing and goggles to guard against the abrasive sand. The belt around his waist and the cinchers around his ears are braided so that they can easily be tightened. His little sand flea has a sail flag, like the flags a doom buggy would have, so that they can still be seen when they're down in a valley, though this flag is a little too short to actually accomplish that. Lone Pine. Nothing specific about the town in this design, just doing a literal visual translation of the sound of the place. The pinecone ruff may have been Katie Cook's idea. Either that, or she pointed out that design in a sketch of mine and made a point of insisting that it should be included. The front sash features a lone pine tree. I'm not sure what purpose the bundle of pine needles is, but I assume it's used like a scepter, or perhaps it's also waved around like an unlit smudge stick to freshen up the air. And lastly, Shorestone. At the point of me writing Winter, I knew there was a connection with that city to Kellinaw and to the Black Axe, but I hadn't yet decided that Kellinaw would be from elsewhere. The motif of the shoulder armor, the ladybug shells, the protractor and plumb bob symbol on the flag were all tie-ins to Kellinaw, but in fact served me well as symbols for the Haven Guild, something I'll go over in the commentary for the third book, The Black Axe. Creating these extra materials was a treat to do, since all the hard work had been done in creating the book design template when Mark Smiley and I collected the fall issues into hardcover format. With Winter, I simply needed to explore the world a bit more and not worry about the page counts, facing pages, and spreads. It's something that I decided to add even more of in The Black Axe. And that wraps up the last commentary for Mouseguard Winter 1152. If you've enjoyed this commentary, please leave your comments in the section below. Let me know what I didn't answer for you in this video, and subscribe for updates when I add more Mouseguard commentary for other volumes. Thank you for watching.